Hello and welcome everybody to Syntropic Farming Primer webinar, Design and Installation. It's hosted with Regenerative Living. My name is Javin Bernakovich and really excited to have everybody here today. And I'll tell you why, because I've been interested and following Scott Gallant's work for a while. He reached out a few years ago to do some work together with values-based decision making, and I always knew I wanted to reach back out to him and learn from him specifically around syntropic agroforestry. So it's an exciting day for us. Great to see everybody starting to say where they're coming from. We've got folks from Aruba, North Vancouver, Florida, Netherlands, Bahamas, Tunisia, Mexico, Ohio, Florida, Canada, Lower Mainland, British Columbia, Bonaire. Wow, fantastic. Thanks so much, everybody. And let us know a little bit about what brought you to the call today. So while we're starting to get a sense of where you're from, what specifically are you keen to take away from today? Is it an introduction to syntropic farming? Is it a deepening of an understanding? Is it you want to see more of Scott's face, and so you decided this was the great way to do it? I know there's a few. He's shaking his head. Nobody can see him yet, but I think that's probably the case. So to start us all off, I just wanted to welcome everybody and give everybody a sense of what and how we arrived here today. So again, my name is Javin Bernakovich. I own and operate allpointsdesign.ca, a regenerative land and life design company that's helping people for the last 15 years to develop incredible properties, but also incredible businesses. And in 2019, I started to see that people were getting a little polarized, a little recalcitrant, and wanted to create something that was not ideologically focused, was focused specifically on learning a skill. So having a skill, learning a skill, and applying that skill specifically to their land. Because I've been in regenerative land design and management now for 15 years, farming, homesteading, designing, installing internationally, I thought to myself, what if I had to start again? If I had to start this whole process over again, I'd want to do it in such a way so I could get a little bit of information and start to build upon that information, start to experiment and do what I need to do. So this is where regenerative living came up. Started it in 2019 with Joe Tobias of Root Shoot Soils, who's an incredible regenerative soil consultant, works in microscopy, making incredible compost teas and extracts, and really wanted to offer practical skills to live on the planet as if we intended to stay. So this isn't about a specific ology or ism. It's specific to the skill, to learn the skill, to apply the skill. And over the last little while, I've had an incredible opportunity to offer 12, now going on 15 courses, ranging from ecological landscapes to composting toilets to rainwater harvesting to values-based decision making, really working with practitioners who are also great educators. There's great practitioners out there in the world, but finding good practitioners that are also educators is rare. And this is where folks like Scott comes in, because not only is Scott a practitioner and has an incredible array of skill and practice behind his belt, but he's also somebody who really loves to share about what he's doing, and he loves to have people understand clearly. And this is why last year or 6 months ago, Scott, my time understanding of how long we've been building the course is totally shot. But I reached out to say, hey, I'd really like to develop a syntropic agroforestry course in English that is specific to examples that we can show, rinse and repeat, and help people really understand this process from a beginning perspective. A lot of this information is in Portuguese or in Spanish, but having something in English that we can all rely upon, work upon, and develop was something I was interested in, and Scott was game. And I love that he was, because building a course takes a lot of time and energy, experience. And so it's just a huge relief and blessing that he was willing to do this. And then as we were getting closer to the date, I said, well, why don't we do a webinar, a little bit of giving back to the community, but at the same time, if people are interested, they may want to be interested in the course. So this is both a standalone. You'll definitely get a huge amount of information about the theory of syntropic farming, syntropic agroforestry. You'll get an actual case study to see how it progresses. Scott will talk for about 45 minutes. Then I will introduce what the course looks like. We'll go through the materials and all the rest of it so folks can really see what it's like. For everybody on the call today, or anybody who's watching the replay, until Sunday, this Sunday, September 29th at midnight, you'll have an opportunity to register for the course with a very short-term discount, which I'll tell everybody about during that call. Pardon me, during that section. During the course or during the webinar, if you have any questions, make sure to put it into the Q&A section at the bottom of your panel there. And here's a very important piece of advice for everybody, for every webinar moving forward. Make sure to put in that question enough context so Scott can answer your question. So if he's on a certain section of the webinar, really make sure you give him that context. If it's, what's that plant there? I will not answer that question or give it to Scott. But if you say, oh, in the first placenta and on row 3, looks like you're doing cacao. What was the nitrogen fixer there? That's a question Scott can answer. Another question Scott can't answer is, I'm in this place with this type of soil and this type of situation. What should I do? That's not a question for a webinar. Great question for a course or a consult if you want to hire Scott directly to do that type of work. So I just want to manage some expectations here in terms of the types of questions that are a good fit for our webinar today. Everyone asks, here's the answer. It's always the same. Of course, you'll get a replay. So if you want to come back to this later on, we will be sending out the replay with an email post this webinar sometime today or tomorrow, as well as the information, which I will give to everybody during after the webinar presentation about the course and how to sign up. During the question and answer section, 3 lucky people in the course randomly picked will be given a spot in the course as a little draw and as a little gift for us to use. So for everybody who stays directly to the end, we'll be drawing 3 people at random, and you'll get access to the course. I will put your names in the chat and also announce it and also give you my email. You must email me to claim that. I'm not going to reach out to you. With that, welcome again, everybody. Very excited for everyone to be here. And Scott, let me say this up front one more time. I told you I'd panagerize you. It's been such a pleasure working with you, seeing the materials you've built for the course, seeing the materials you built for the webinar. It's completely reinforced the decision to work together. And thank you so much for giving your time today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm excited to be here and to dive in with everybody.
Awesome, mate. Well, I'm going to pass it on to you, and I'm excited for what you have to share with us.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and open up the screen share. We're going to dive in. Okay. All right. So for the next 40 minutes, 45 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about syntropic farming. And the purpose of this webinar is to, one, look at a case study, a specific project here in Costa Rica that we've co-created with Javier Albonor, who's joining us here on the webinar. And in addition, what we're really focused on is the design process. So we wanted to zoom into all of the steps one would take really before planting. And so that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at different tools for that and how we went about doing it for this specific process. So just to share a little bit more about my background,
Scott,
I'm originally from
continue,
Ohio.
I'll just,
yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, we got the video.
I got it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I'm Scott Gallant. I'm originally from a little town outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. I've been here in Costa Rica now for about 15 years and have been pretty much practicing agroforestry that entire time. Pretty deep into the field of agroforestry. I was thinking back, and I organized our first workshop about 13 years ago. And then maybe about 10 years ago, like many people, I saw a YouTube video called Life in Syntropy about syntropic farming that came out of Brazil. And it made me just go like, ooh, there's a deeper way to approach this. There's people in Brazil that are perhaps, I don't know, 10, 20 years further along than I am. And so we organized what I think was the first syntropic farming course in Central America with Fernando Repeio of Cepeyas and Tiago Barbosa of Syntropic Solutions. And basically since then have been working with folks like Javi and Tierramor, the project he's going to introduce here in a moment, as well as others in Costa Rica to apply syntropic farming, to keep learning about this process. our team at Porvenir Design, there's 5 of us. We're essentially a permaculture design firm. We're very focused on long-term perennial agroecosystems, and hence syntropic farming comes into our work fairly often. So I just want to take a moment, though, and open the space to Javier, who's really been the person on the ground co-designing this system and really managing this particular system we're going to talk about. So he's going to be able to answer a lot of the more detailed questions. So yeah, Javi, thanks for joining us. And if you can tell us about yourself and then a little about Tierramor.
For sure. Thank you, Scott. Hello, everybody. Scott said, my name is Javier Abdelnour. I'm an agricultural scientist by profession, and I've been working with permaculture for the past 8 to 10 years, and specifically with agroforestry and syntropic agroforestry for the past 3 to 4 years. Scott's been mentoring me in this process, and we built 2 agroforestry systems already here at Tierramor. So a little bit about Tierramor. Tierramor is a regenerative community in the area of Nosara in Costa Rica. That's located in the province of Guanacaste in the northwest part of the country. The weather here, the climate here is a dry tropical forest going into a tropical savanna. We're at 240 meters of elevation. So the ocean is pretty close. We're like a 20-minute drive from the nearest beach. The farm is around 200 hectares, and it's been a cattle farm for the past 20 to 25 years. It's really degraded. The farm was planted with Brachiaria brisanta, which is an exotic grass, and it's taking over the whole farm. So we're in the process of transforming those pastures into agroforestry systems. In the area, we have around 1,500 millimeters of rainfall, mostly from June to December. And then we have a 6-month dry period from January to around April or May. And one of the main objectives of this project of Tierramor is to collapse the false dichotomy between agriculturally productive and biologically diverse land use. So we're trying to figure out how can we bring back biodiversity into the farm, and at the same time produce the resources that we need to build a community here on site. We also host meditation retreats, permaculture courses, bamboo construction, natural building. We build a lot with clay and earth, and we do agroforestry workshops as well. We've done 2 in the past, and we're gonna talk a little bit about one of the agroforestry systems that we built in one of those courses.
Gracias, Javi. Appreciate that. So one of the things that I want to touch upon before we dive in a little bit is a little bit more of the purpose behind both this webinar and the course, and why I'm interested in teaching this topic. I find when people dive into syntropic farming, for a lot of folks, it's similar to work they've done in the past, similar to other agroforestry practices, but in reality, there are differences. And I really want to give emphasis to those differences. What we're trying to do is really help simplify the design process. We're trying to get people to what we call the 95% faster. So in syntropic farming, we talk about management as being 95% of the work. Really, the design work, the planting work is 5%. That's like the fast part. I want to get people planting quicker. I want to get them into their intuition faster, and really try to help people avoid, there's a classic permaculture term called type 1 design errors. So there's certain things in syntropic farming where if you do that wrong, it's probably going to be a problem 5, 10 years down the road. There's all sorts of things where you can make lots of mistakes and it's not going to matter. It's going to be fine. But we're really trying to help people focus in on really the key points We're going to be introducing some digital and analog tools that we found useful in our process, and we're going to see some of those here in the webinar specifically. So briefly, I just want to introduce what is syntropic farming. We'll spend a few minutes here before diving into the case study specifically. So syntropic farming comes out of Brazil. It's a terminology and methodology created by Ernst Gost, an agronomist from Sweden. And in short, he had an aha moment. His professional work was in plant breeding. And what he was finding was that all of the work he was doing was trying to breed plants so that they were more drought resistant, more tolerant to degraded land. And what he realized was we might be better off actually improving the ecosystem so that the plants themselves can thrive. And instead of changing the plants, changing the ecosystem. So that was what we might call like his originating impulse. He coined the term syntropy as an opposite to entropy. So entropy is this idea from thermodynamics that systems become simpler, they break down over time. In syntropy, what we see, or in biology, in biology, what we see is that over time, systems become more complex. And what we find in biological systems is that the interactions between the soil food web, plants, everything else comes together to actually organize energy in specific ways. And that is the act of syntropic farming, is like, how do we accumulate and organize energy in a specific way? On the most simple level, the way we do that is by planting seeds and pruning trees. Like, I really love that idea. Like, if we just broke this down to the most basic component, this is what we're doing. Another aspect of syntropic farming that, while not unique to it, I think it gives great emphasis to, is that it is a process-based agriculture. We can compare that to an input-based agriculture. So most conventional agriculture, or I say all conventional agriculture, practically all organic agriculture is input-based, right? We go somewhere else, we purchase something, we bring it to the farm. In a process-based agriculture, we're trying to leverage the ecological processes that happen on the land to do all of that work for us. And you'll see at the bottom of the slide here, really the processes that we're working with in syntropic farming are ecological succession, photosynthesis, and then the whole beautiful chaos mystery that is the soil food web. We're really trying to leverage all of those things together. Some of the specific things that we find unique to syntropic farming is that it is both a farming practice and a reforestation practice. We're trying to get to productive forest as quickly as possible. And if we think about the context of Brazil, this heavily deforested, degraded country, like think about the Amazon rainforest and everything we know about, how many hectares per year we're losing there. In order to get people to plant forests, they're going to need a yield early on. And so what we talk about is that we're going to plant right next to our timber tree or our reforestation tree, we're going to plant a radish. So something that gives us a yield within 30 days next to something that gives us a yield within 30 years. And they're going to grow side by side for as long as they need to in the system. And we talk about this as putting the right plant in the right place at the right time. What we're really working with that I think syntropic farming has developed a beautiful methodology for that I don't see in other agroforestry methods is time as a key variable. Like, ecological succession is what we're doing here. So that's the short version of what syntropic farming is. There's tons of resources out there. I would really recommend the Life in Syntropy website or Agenda Ghost website to keep exploring these ideas. In the theory of syntropic farming, there's a couple things that I think it's worth understanding before we dive in further. The two main concepts are going to be that we're organizing plants over space. We'll call that the stratification of the plants, and we're organizing them over time. We can think of this is ecological succession, and we call this life cycle. And the group of plants together in this is called the consortium. I'm going to jump to, let's see, we're going to go over here. And we're going to zoom in on this same model. So this is pulled from the folks at Life in Syntropy. And if you were to just study one diagram, piece of information from syntropic farming, this is where I would tell you to put your time and energy. And so what's going on here is that on our x-axis over here, we see our strata. So we have emergent plants, we have understory plants, we have plants on the forest floor, etc. I want to make a distinction between strata and forest layers, which is a common concept in maybe like a permaculture food forest methodology. When we're talking about strata, we're really talking about the light requirements of plants. We're not talking about their size. Those are often related, but I'm organizing these plants by how much sunlight do they need. And so emergent plants need full sun all the time. A canopy plant might need sun 80% of the time, and et cetera. We go down. And so this is how we organize plants spatially. Now we have the other side, our y-axis, which is our life cycle. We find three kind of main words that we use a lot, and that's placenta, secondary, and climax. And this little grid we end up with here is what we're going to call our consortium. Each box in this grid, like an individual box, like that, is basically an ecological niche. What we're trying to do is fill every one of those ecological niches with individual plants. Now, this whole diagram that we're looking at here, it's divided into two systems, something called an accumulation and another called an abundance system. Just to explain this quickly, the accumulation system refers to what we might plant in an environment that's heavily degraded. If we actually look at the individual plants in here on the abundance system, they're mostly food-producing plants. So we're going to find things like olives, almonds, sugar apples, pistachios, citrus, grapes. This is from a Mediterranean climate, this example. And so we actually are working here in the accumulation system when the land is heavily degraded and it's not yet ready to produce food for us. And when the land is ready to produce food for us, we move over to an abundance system. And this is a key thing to distinguish in syntropic farming. Most of our work professionally is just in abundance systems. The land we're working with, it might be degraded, but it's not so degraded. Or we can also cheat and add compost, add rock dust, add mulch, and kind of jumpstart the system so we can produce food sooner in the system. So again, I'm just going to touch upon like what this is. It's worth coming back to this and really studying this. On a more practical side, like this little diagram here, very simple, is what we use at a really basic level to start picking the plants for this system. And so again, we see our emergent, our tall, our medium, and our low. Sorry, it's in Spanish. I'm in full Spanglish in my life. As I'm looking at it, there's all sorts of languages here. But over here, this is our strata. And then again, we have our life cycle. This is how long the plants last in our system. And we remove them from our system either by harvesting them or by pruning them to make room for the next group of plants. This is the basis of the consortium. So this is like, there's a practitioner who I really like, Scott Hall, who's based in Australia. And he calls this the vehicle that we're traveling with through time, all of our plants together in our system. So again, this is a consortium. It's like the basic thing we create when we're starting to think about syntropic farming and all the plants that we're going to want to fill a system with. You can see there's a high level of diversity in this system, and we're going to be planting these very densely as well. So let me go back to here. Briefly, I want to mention that syntropic farming is really popular right now. It's really moving through the world, hence we're here and there's so many people signed up. We see it in the tropics where it is birthed from. We're also really starting to see it around the Mediterranean climates. A practitioner who I really follow and love his work, Mark Lieber in Portugal, is one of the leaders there. And there's so many courses happening, little projects, bigger projects happening in Mediterranean climates, in Southern Europe in particular. We also see another hotspot really happening over in Australia and New Zealand. A project that I again follow and draw a lot of inspiration from is Misty Creek Agroforestry. So I just want to say this, as I know there's people from all over the world here. If there's not somebody practicing syntropic farming near you now, there will be soon. Hopefully you can maybe be the pioneer in that. But people are playing with this in every climate you can imagine. Maybe it's not as advanced in a cold temperate climate as it is in the humid tropics. But much like permaculture, when we look at the principles of syntropic farming, we find that we can apply them around the globe. The actual design of our spaces is going to change. And that's a bit of what we play with in syntropic farming. Okay. So on a practical level, our design process follows these steps. I was spending some time thinking about how to add a little bit of a linear step 1, 2, 3 to this, to syntropic farming. We start with site analysis and context. We move into what's the purpose of the project? Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? Then we're going to focus in on what we're going to call our target crop. What is it that we're really trying to grow? This can be multiple things. This might be a commodity for market. It might be just for our own homestead, but we're really looking to define, get some clarity there. Like, we're trying to grow X, Y, and Z. Then we move into the whole consortium design, species selection. We start touching upon things like, what inputs do we need? Are we going to try to jumpstart the system with mulch, compost, or are we going to plant a whole accumulation system before then? And finally, we get into site layout, the details of row layout, orientation, how we organize the plants. And we're going to spend probably more time in that than anything else over the next half an hour together. We'll present some digital and analog tools at the end that we found to be most useful in our work. Okay. So site analysis and context, I'm going to come back over here. Beautiful. Something that I would describe as a weakness of syntropic farming is that it tends to just focus in on the boundaries where we're planting. Ooh, that's too thick. So that's our field plot. And in my experience in syntropic farming, it's very focused on just within that field plot. But we have to take time to analyze what's going on around us. So when we were thinking about what case study to do of all of our projects, we wanted to bring in one that had like a lot of interesting things happening around it that really informed a lot of our decision making. So as you can see, this is a pretty steep site. There's a lot of erosion uphill and kind of sliding through here. We had this old farm road that creeps over somewhere else and a really steep gully over on this side. We have this other farm road here. And a couple of the things that really informed the design and experimentation in this site were the impact of wind and our access to the site. And so I'm going to slide over to this image. To get to this site, it's actually pretty close to kind of the farm headquarters. But because of erosion, the nature of the roads, it's kind of hard to get to with a vehicle. And so there's this big road here, but that's about a 5-meter deep gully. Like you would need a ladder to get from that road up to the site. So, and coming in from this side, you have to pass through a really big ravine that's just starting to erode, and it's probably an engineering problem to fix. So what we did is we brought in a road from over here, and you can actually see our plants kind of being stationed here. We needed a place to be able to bring materials in. The other main component from like a site analysis perspective here that is, and we're going to see the examples of this, is that we have these really strong winds coming in from this direction. North is over here. Javi, correct me if I'm wrong about anything, but I think I've got it. The winds in particular are really problematic for us, and we're going to see the implication of that on the plant growth. It's kind of interesting. And then one of the pieces that we really took into consideration is that we're at the top of the watershed here, our little micro watershed. This is the peak right here. And so there's actually not runoff from this road or like this hillside over here. That water doesn't end up going onto our site. And that helped us make decisions to experiment with different layout patterns that were actually off of contour, which is something we find in syntropic farming that's fairly common and that makes them all nervous, which is fine. So we start with site analysis, understanding the context. That's all I'm going to say about this, but really understanding the wind was key for us, that there isn't a lot of runoff here. We do have land that's sloughing, this like kind of erosion, but it's land it's dropping. And then trying to figure out access. How do we move into this site? Those were pieces that informed a lot of how we ended up placing plants around this. Okay. The second aspect of our design is we have to understand what we're trying to accomplish here. And this seems really basic. People really struggle with this though. And so for this project, we're trying to grow food for the restaurant that's on site. And then you'll see we're trialing all these different things. So there's really a context of experimentation here. So we're trialing a nut crop called a hoche. It's a native nut that really hasn't been used as a food source for probably 50, 60, 70 years in this area. We're trialing coffee and cacao, which have historically been grown in this area, but are all but abandoned. We're trialing a zero irrigation approach. And if you remember Javi talking about the context of this site, we do get a fair amount of rain, but it is concentrated just in 4-5 months of the year. The dry season here is very real. And then we're trialing different layout strategies and orientations, and we're going to see a lot of that as we move through this. So this is where design work really starts becoming more detail-oriented. The selection of the target crop. You can design a syntropic farming system for tree crops, which is mostly what we're doing. We're in the tropics. We have this abundance of amazing tree crops. You could design for horticulture. You could design for animals. You could design for a diversity of fruit trees. The key is just understanding that purpose, because it's really going to then inform your row spacing. And so the selection of our target crop in this system at Tierramor, our target crop's a hoche. We also have things like mango, cashew, avocado in this system. A system we just installed where I'm carrying this tree, our target crop was pili nut. And so, for example, let's say we're going to pick avocado as our target crop. Everyone loves avocados. It's kind of a no-brainer. What that means is we look at the commercial spacing of avocado trees and we work backwards from there. So here in Costa Rica in the tropics, avocados are typically spaced, like grafted avocados, at 6 meters. So that's going to start us off telling us that our row spacing is going to be 6 meters apart. The spacing between trees is going to be 6 meters apart. And what we're doing is we're working from that climax crop. An avocado is a climax species, meaning, again, that from a succession perspective, from a perspective of the word we used was life cycle, it's in our system for a very long time. And so we start from that aspect of our consortium, and then we work all the way down to the tiniest, fastest growing plants, which we call the placenta. So this is like your radish, your corn, your beans, your green manure cover crops. But we work backwards from there from a design perspective. One thing I wanted to touch upon is about an idea of scale. So if we're going to scale these systems up, what happens is we often have to reduce our diversity. One of the things we aren't going to sacrifice that I think is very unique in syntropic farming is our density. We plant at extreme high density in syntropic farming. So as we get bigger in these systems, the number of plants per square meter is going to stay the same, but the amount of species in that square meter is going to reduce. And we're going to see examples of that here in a moment. Another piece that I would really recommend from a design framework is that if we have multiple target crops, we're going to separate them by strata and life cycle so they don't overlap. So I'll come back to that in a moment, but we're going to keep moving through this. So once we've decided, like, these are the things we want to grow, we want to eat these, there's a market for them, we can transform them into, I don't know, guacamole business. Then we have to fill out the rest of our consortium, that grid that we looked at the beginning. And this image here on the left was created by Javi on an app called Procreate that we like using for design sometimes. And you can see how many plants are located in a very small space. So outside of the target crops, what we're mostly doing are looking for support species. And for those familiar with permaculture, gilding, permaculture food forests, this will be a more familiar place. We have to feed the system. So we're looking for plants. Classic plants would be like nitrogen fixing trees, ground covers, cover crops that are going to fit into this space. What you're going to see is that as we pick each plant, we pick a papaya, we pick, I don't know, what would be a temperate, like black locust would be a great, poplar, willow. We start locating them in that original consortium we had. And we're going to do this thing where we separate out strata by their, let me say it differently. When we pick the plant and we understand its strata, is it a low, a medium, a high, or emergent, we're going to separate those out so the low and high plants live together and the medium and emergent plants live together. And the key here, and what we really are trying to help people do, is that you really just have to plant a lot of things. Like, what we encourage people is spend a lot of time thinking about those target crops. Like, those are things that are going to feed you. They're going to make money for you. All of these other species, they're just there to move the system along in succession. And so we're really focused on what do we have in abundance. And sometimes that might surprise us. One of the things we found here in the tropics is that fruit trees can actually be our best support species. So in the dry tropics where Javi's working, mango has been an awesome ally for us. In the wet tropics, where I work a lot, jackfruit and mamonchino, we plant just for biomass. I'm never going to get a jackfruit fruit from those trees. They're just to cut to open up sunlight for the next round of plants and put organic material on the soil. Let's see, let's go back to here. So let's touch upon this a little bit more. So if we look at this example here, we can see that there are crops for food production. We have Marañón is cashew, mango, jackfruit. We have coffee and cacao. Over here, we have a bunch of tubers like ginger, turmeric, a tuber that's like malanga or taro. Familiar with taro? Pineapple. Up here, I see pigeon pea and yucca. But almost everything else in the system is really just to support producing these food crops. And there's some exceptions in here, and there's things we'll play with. But again, what we're doing when we're trying to fill in this space is to have each one of these ecological niches filled by a plant. And what happens is if we arrive, let's say, to this space here, wrong one. And if that's not full, like if we don't have a plant there, nature's going to fill that for us. And so those are opportunities for diseases to come into our system, or they're opportunities for weeds, we'll use that word, to come into our system. And so if we find gaps in our system where we don't have a plant ready to be placed, that's where we're going to see the problems starting to emerge. Now, if we come back over here, I talked about how we arrange the plants in specific ways. And so what we're doing here is organizing them by strata. And so we can see in this row here, we have our emergent and our medium plants together. Once again, our emergent and our medium plants happen over here. But this row is our tall and our low plants. And so this is a really common pattern in syntropic farming. It's going to be repeated over and over again. In between, organic material, organic material. So in those rows, we're just growing plants to cover the soil. That's like the simplest version that I'll describe. Let's see. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to row layout. Go away. There we go. Just some quick comments on common inputs and some advice that I think we can apply. You can't have too many seeds in your system. The more things will start from seed, the better. If we compare that to starting plants that are like purchased in a nursery bag or that we start in our own home and putting those in the ground, they already have these root systems that are developed. What we really want happening are seeds germinated in the system. They're making their way through the soil from like the most embryonic moment of their life. And we're always going to be overplanting. So we use the oak tree as an inspiration, like all those acorns that fall, the big mast of acorns that comes down, like 1 out of 10,000 of those seeds will become a mature tree. But it's this whole genetic strategy of throwing out a huge amount of babies and then letting nature select based on the conditions of that site, which one will continue in the line of succession. So we're going to use that same strategy by overplanting a huge amount of seeds. In that same line, you can't have too many trees. And I really mean trees as support species. Think of like native forest trees. We take advantage of a lot of reforestation programs that exist here in Costa Rica where we can go and get trees for super affordable, and then we can dump these into the system to have the density we're looking for. So these are two things that I think people can really focus on in their work when you're at a point of, I don't know if this tree works, or where does this exactly fit into the consortium. You can't overplant these things, because all they're going to provide you an opportunity for is management, for creating more organic material, creating more sunlight, having more photosynthesis happen down the road. The other main inputs we look at in these systems is going to be mulch, compost, rock dust, and then of course labor. For mulch, compost, and rock dust, we have rules of thumb. So for example, you can see compost, we often apply 1.5 liters of compost, 300 grams of rock dust per square meter. A rule of thumb for mulch is that I want 3 cubic meters of mulch plants growing for every 1 cubic meter of production that I'm going to have. All that being said, we could avoid all of these inputs if we take our time to create a accumulation system. And we'll look at that here at the end of our call. And then labor, these are more labor-intensive systems. Our recommendation is always to start small, to do a few rows, experiment, see how it goes, and expand from there. Okay. So site layout and orientation is a piece that I think is really interesting. This quick analysis that we see here was created by Javi, just to understand the basic needs of the site, where we want to reforest, where we need a windbreak, how big is the area. But probably the most interesting things that started happening was when we had to start making decisions around how to orient the rows. And this image on the top right has the rows perfectly north to south. And they're not on contour. The image on the left was the kind of final design that we did in collaboration with an amazing group of folks based out of Mexico and Costa Rica called Colectivo Ybil. And the image on the right was at the beginning of this rainy season, or I think, yeah, beginning of this rainy season, right before we planted the second part. And so we're going to come back over to here. And let's come up here. And so I'm going to have Javi join us here. Let's see, come here, eraser. And Javi, can you share about the decision-making for how to orient these rows? Because there's interesting things happening here. This is not an on-contour system. And again, this is something that people get scared of when they learn about this in syntropic farming. So I'd love to hear like how this process went for you.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So at first we were planning on planting on contour, following the contour lines and just doing parallel lines, as you can see on the left side of the design picture. And when, like a couple days before planting the first part of the system, we were having a discussion with Nad Muguet, which is an agroforestry professional from Brazil, and she came to give the course. And she was saying that in Brazil, most of their systems are planted off contour, so like up and down the hill. And we were very surprised by that, because that's not conventional, you know. Most of the people are used to planting on contour, following the contour lines. So since we were experimenting with this agroforestry system, we kind of took a chance. We weren't convinced at the beginning. We were very nervous about what could happen, erosion, and the soil was exposed at that time. But we took a chance and we planted up and down the hill, as you can see on the right side of the picture. And in the end, like looking back, it's way easier to manage the system that way, because when you're walking through the system, you're walking up and down the hill, and you're not walking like sideways on the contour lines. So it's way more comfortable for the body, and it's easier to walk around and prune and do all the things that you need to do. Also, something interesting is that since we planted this way, the tree rows are shorter. So you get through the row when you're doing your management and pruning, you get finished with one row much quicker. And so you finish one row and you're motivated to go into the next one instead of having like a really long tree row that you need to manage and you can't see the end. You're kind of overwhelmed by it. If you have shorter rows, you can see the end. You can see how much management you have to do, and it feels like a motivation trick when you're doing the work.
And then a big piece with this, that if we think of the principles of syntropic farming and the stratification, the reason we're stacking all these plants together is to maximize photosynthesis. And another way we can maximize photosynthesis is by orienting our tree lines as close to north and south as possible. And so in this example, north is, I think it's like this, I drew it earlier. And these rows coming down the slope aren't quite north to south, but we decided they were going to be, we wanted to angle them a little bit to work with the slope a bit more. And a couple of things that were really interesting, we definitely took the time to come above here and put a lot of extra organic material down. And the key for this, if we're going to plant these up and down the slope, is that there's actually enough organic material to cover the soil. So we're making this assumption that, hey, our system is planted dense enough and well-designed enough that we're going to be able to cover all the soil. If we achieve that, we're pretty confident that erosion won't happen. Now, thinking about, again, the context of this place, if there was a huge amount of water runoff from some cause up above, I don't know if we would have done these off of contour. We might have been more inclined to put them on contour. But what then becomes the fun part about this system is we have both systems happening here. So we have on contour lines and off contour lines, and we get to see the difference. And so if we think back to the purpose of this project, this is to experiment. The idea is that this whole space gets translated into this 200-hectare monster of a project, and we're going to find out what works here. So that's what's going on a bit. Let's see about, yeah, I think that is perfect. I'm going to keep going. You know what? I want to talk about that as well. Okay, I'm going to keep going back to our sketching. Okay, other really interesting things about the design here. And Javi, I'm going to have you talk about this a little bit. But what is the difference in management that you ended up deciding to do between, I think it's maybe 3 different areas? Can you talk about that a little bit outside of the row orientation, but what are some of the strategies that we made? And I'm also curious, this lower rectangle we planted in 2023, and then this guy is 2024. I'm curious what you learned, what the differences were between these 2 years.
Yeah, so the area that we planted in 2023, we started off with an abundance system. Let's say we came in with the grafted trees, the grafted fruit trees, and we planted them since the beginning. And some of those trees were mangoes, cashews, avocados, and at the end of the year, avocados didn't make it. So we were thinking that maybe it wasn't the right time for them. Maybe they needed more an accumulation system before planting the grafted fruit trees. So we took that lesson and we applied it to what we planted this year, 2024. And we divided the area in two parts. So on the top part in the picture, we still planted grafted fruit trees, and we kind of continued with the same strategy, but we added way more organic matter plants. Like it's much denser than the system on the right. And then on the bottom half of the system that we planted this year, we planted an accumulation system. So no fruit trees, only accumulation plants, only organic matter plants, with the idea to come in a couple of years, maybe 2026, and come in with the fruit trees and plant them in an already established system.
And again, this comes down to the purpose of the project. Like we're trying to experiment here. I'm gonna come and look at a few other examples that I think are interesting to peek at. This photo Javi just took. This is our 2024 planting. And the most fascinating piece to me is the effect of the wind on this site. And so we come back to our context and our site analysis. The wind comes in really strong from over here. And what we can see is that this whole half is very slow. Things really are struggling in that wind, but these lines provide just enough windbreak that this half over here is really happy. And these become things that when we have a chance to observe over time, really help us make decisions moving forward in these systems so that we know when we're going to extend this in the future, it's probably worth waiting a few years even and getting that windbreak installed. And, we're not the most patient species, so sometimes that's hard for us. And let's see, I want to look at a couple examples of different ways we organize this information on paper using things like Microsoft Excel, spreadsheets, before we go out in the field. So when we're selecting all of our species, and I just want to say this graphic is from our friends at Colectivo Wybill, who were really involved with the workshops that we did in these two areas. And so you'll see some of the stuff we've been talking about. You'll see a column that has life cycle. You'll see another column that has strata. And then we have the individual plants. One of the things we're really trying to get to in this design work is this final column, which is how many plants do we need? And you guys can see these numbers, right? Like, I don't know if people can see them, but it's like 500 plants of corn, 2,000 beans, 1,200 gingers, 250 nance, which is like a native fruit tree. That's not very good. It's better for firewood. But the sheer quantity of plants is really high. And a couple interesting things from this chart that I think are worth looking at. Also, Javin, just for getting later in time, feel free to give me a little ring and I can wrap us up whenever. I was looking at this earlier, and this is what stood out to me. Remember how I said, I really want to start as many things from seed as possible. And so that's what I'm analyzing here. I see a lot of seeds in this section, including seedlings, rhizomes, stick is a cutting, that counts. And then I see seedlings, so like things from a nursery here and a lot more down here. And so this becomes a pattern that I can use to analyze costs of these systems and where maybe I can improve in the future. And so all of my really young plants, the placenta 1, placenta 2, they're almost all from seed. I'm doing excellent. And then I can see there's this whole group here that are seedlings. So they're in nursery bags. They have root systems already established. Those roots might be poorly managed from nurseries. Like if you bought plants from nurseries, it doesn't always inspire you. When I see this, what it tells me is, I wonder if I can next year, can I take this group of plants and start them from seed direct in the system? And I'm looking for opportunities like that when I'm analyzing this. And so again, in a chart like this, what I'm trying to figure out ahead of time is get an idea of how many plants I need. And then this is all going to translate to, of course, like the cost, which we do an analysis of. The actual row design that happened, and this is the row design that Javi did for the last system here. And there's some common language we'll see in syntropic farming. We often call these A rows and B rows, which will distinguish what strata are in each row. And the pattern that you'll see is a row of trees followed by a path, followed by grass for mulch, path, row of trees, and this repeats. And this is going to be one of our base patterns. When I said in inputs and mulch that we want to have 3-to-1 biomass to tree rows, what I'm trying to do is I want this like Mombasa grass row. I want that to be 2 or 3 meters wide. Right now it's 2 meters wide in comparison to my tree row, which in this case is 0.8 meters wide. And this is a good rule of thumb for us. So I'm trying to get up to like, again, trying to get like a ratio of 3-to-1 organic material lines to production lines. This is what we're striving for. And then I'll show one last example here. This was a different project we just finished of a way we'll use Microsoft Excel to design these systems. Like pretty simple, but a nice thing. Over here, you can see this is every 0.25 centimeters is a line. We have our A row, we have our B row, and then a C row in between. You can see that, we zoom in a little bit, we have our tall and our low species together in the B row. And then we have our emergent and our medium. Ooh, hello. Ooh, there's whole new options. We have our emergent and our medium species together in the A row. And so let me just explain what that means really quick. I'll draw it over here. What that means is in our A row, we have the things that are going to grow the tallest. And then we're going to grow right next to them in the same row, our medium species. Our B row over here, we're going to have things that are tall and things that are low. And what we're trying to do is maintain these gaps between the canopies here. And so this is how we stack things on top of each other and create these really dense systems in syntropic farming. So even though in this space, there's all sorts of things growing, we're putting them in specific ways so that their canopies are not touching. And depending on how much light they need, they kind of get separated almost in this, we could call it like a little, I don't know, a zigzag pattern with a lot of meters. This could be, 6 meters or so between tree rows. And so this is a way that we start looking at this. And if we go back all the way, let's go to this consortium up here. Hello. We're often connecting. Let's see, how do I want to draw this? Let's do this guy. We're going to connect niches like this. So these boxes, oh, I messed up one. There we go. Citrus. So the different colors, I would put all of these plants in the same row. And so when we talk about separating plants by life cycle and strata in their rows, this is how we do it. So that means all the plants here here are in the same row, same as the citrus, same as this guy, same as this guy. All these guys are planted in the same row together. And all the ones that are in blue are in the same row together. This is how we achieve such high density within a small space in syntropic farming. So again, these are different ways from a design perspective that we start organizing these projects. So I'm going to keep moving us through to the very end. We're almost there. We just looked at that. Some tools, our favorite tools. I love whiteboards. They just do wonders for me. Graph paper is excellent. Spreadsheets are really helpful. There's definitely a bit of like energy in syntropic farming of you're on a spreadsheet, you're not out there planting. And I really dislike that. I find whatever tool works for you, works for you. Google Earth Pro, we do work on the iPad. I'm over here like on the iPad now. Procreate and Morpholio Trace are two programs that we use a lot. A drone is really nice. And then just out on site, though, you can do a lot with just tape measure, string, stakes, limestone, etc. Limestone, like crushed limestone, you would sprinkle on the ground to mark out rows, mark out plant locations, etc. And when you put this all together, there's this whole step that is sourcing everything, where you get all this from. How do you organize it, nursery work, etc. And then we arrive at installation, feedback, management. That's like a whole nother, you come take the big course, come to an in-person class, etc. And what I just want to say is, well, exactly what it says here, right? Like, why do we take time to design? Like, we do this to make mistakes on paper. Like, we really want to see how these plants are going to fit together, how many we need, what's it's going to cost before we jump into the project. So it's worth it to develop some of this process yourself. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you guys for your time. These are Porvenir Designs, our website. Javi is the farm manager at Tierramor. And then you can find us both on Instagram. And then I think we'll have a moment at the end to say anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Javin. And I think did pretty good staying within our time. It's so hard.
Scott, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I was talking with Scott before our conversation here, and we were both kind of giggling that as educators, we love giving everything, even if it's, it's an hour webinar, or if it's a short course or a long course, we want to give as much as we can. And the level of detail, Scott, that you were able to share in such a short amount of time really showcases your skill as an educator and your skill as a practitioner, and just the desire and the love to share with people is just exceptional. And the chat's going crazy with lots of wonderfuls and thank yous and thumbs ups. And yeah, I'm very excited for the course. Again, I'm the host of the course. I'm a practitioner 15 years, but this is new for me in Syntropic Agroforestry, and I'm even more excited for it. So yeah, thank you again, mate. I so appreciate that. For everybody who's still with us and hasn't been with us from the beginning, I'm going to take a short moment to talk about the upcoming course that's coming up. And then afterwards, we're going to go through the Q&A. And then for everybody who stays to the very end, there's an opportunity potentially to win a spot in the course. We're going to have 3 spots that we're going to pull at random. So again, just wanted to connect the conversation here that this is a course that's put on by Regenerative Living. an online educational platform that I developed in 2019 that's really about how do we learn practical skills to stay on the planet as if we intend to stay. This has been a big focus of mine for a very long time. And over the last 4 years, we've been able to host an incredible array of individuals who have really shared their pinnacle of experience. Courses, as we talked about before, from ecological landscape design, which is not really talked about from an aesthetic perspective, to propagating plants, to how do we ensure that our families have the food security they need. We're coming into a time when being aware of where we get our food and having abundance within that is really important. And we have some great courses coming up. Scott's is up in October. We have an amazing course with Joe Tobias called The Alternate Science of Cultivating Living Soils. If you've been looking at living soil courses and you don't want to spend thousands of dollars, Joe is an incredible educator who's a great practitioner. Kelpie Wilson's going to be joining us in 2025 to do a complete course about biochar and farms and homesteads. Her brand new book that's out right now is an incredible tome. But if you want to be guided, this is what's so great about in-person guided courses online, is that you have the ability to be guided through the information. And in many of these courses, like in Scott's course, you have the opportunity to be able to have a presentation, share a presentation, make a design, and have that shared. Also, Mark Krawczyk is going to be joining us in the new year to do the simple genius of keyline design and plowing from the perspective of the plow. And then I'll be guiding folks through developing a regenerative business and advanced land design courses next year. So where are you at? Are you at a place where you want to design and implement these types of systems? Is it of interest for you? Is it something that's becoming more important? Is it a time where if you had this information, you could make better choices down the road? And if so, do you want to skip common mistakes? Do you want to skip the cost of time and money that comes with mistakes? This is the thing I've learned. We all have to learn by ourselves, but we don't have to learn alone. And the best thing about mistakes is we can either learn from our mistakes or somebody else's mistakes. And this is where the value of being guided through a process is so apparent. So we can be guided by folks who are practitioners, and sometimes they're not teachers. We can be guided by teachers who may not be practicing as much as their Instagram says. Or we can be guided by a practitioner and a teacher, somebody who likes to teach, somebody who's good at it, somebody who takes the time to explain what's going on. And as I've learned over the 15 years of developing my business, I can read all the books, I can watch all the YouTube videos, but actually being able to learn from somebody who's been there before, develop a design, have them give feedback, there's really nothing that compares to it. So I've learned there's kind of two options in life. We can do trial and error. And first time I ever went, not rock climbing, but ice climbing, I was with a group and I went up, 2-3 meters, 10 feet. And I came back down and the instructor was like, Javin's what we call a basher. Javin likes to make his own holes and he doesn't like to take the opportunities that are in front of him. And we had a little laugh because I'm definitely strong-headed. I like going through and just finding my own way, but it's very expensive, right? It's calorically expensive. It's mentally expensive. Takes a lot of expense to do it wrong before you can get it right. Option two is simple strategic systems. So in that situation, our ice climbing instructor was like, let me show you how to find a hole and let me show you how to test a hole. So that way you don't have to make a hole like Javin was doing. And that's really what Scott is being able to offer here starting October 15th, going to November 6th. Is he's showing you all the holes within the syntropic farming, syntropic agroforestry process that he's found that you can learn from. In that, we've got 10 hours of class presentations. We've got 4 hours of class Q&A. We've got 40 curated resources. We have a master species list that covers tropical, temperate, Mediterranean. It's really meant to be the first next best step for anybody who has no experience with syntropic agroforestry, or those that have, but they want something really condensed, something in English language and something that has resources that they can access in the long term. But instead of me telling you all about it, why don't I just show you what it looks like? So when you go to the Syntropic Agroforestry webpage, the landing page that we've developed, you'll get a sense, and I've also got it in the chat there as well. You'll have a chance to actually take a look through the entire course as it sits today. So you'll get the chance to take a look at some of the examples that Scott's going to be going through, learn about how and where we can go from something like this to something like this, where it's a fully matured system. It's a system that's developed. If you're looking to develop insights on something you already know, if you wanted to build a roadmap, this is what we talk about so many times within this type of work. It's nice to have a framework and a roadmap and a process that you can go through time and time again. And Scott and I have really been developing this in such a way that anybody can come to this and develop that process out of it. We'll have 7 online calls. You'll have a recording to each of these calls. Those calls will be split up into specific sections. So like today, we'll have sections specifically about the entire process and then sections about choosing plants. So that way you don't have to go back and watch another, hour and a half video to find what you're looking for. Everything will be perfectly edited to just what you're looking for. It's a good class for agricultural professionals, permaculture designers, environmentalists, gardeners and homesteads, policymakers, teachers and students, or wannabes. If you're in that place where this is just what you're interested in doing, and this is what you want to be doing, and this is background research and education, great course for that as well. What's not a good course where we found this a lot in the last 4 years of doing this is if you don't have a lot of time, if you're already enrolled in 3 other courses online or in person, probably not a good fit. Or if you're just looking for once and done, quick and done, this is a course really about developing a process and understanding of the process from what Scott's developed. I'll get into the different modules in a second. So what is it? We have 7 live Zoom calls. We'll have an hour of presentation from Scott. We'll have a 20-minute group discussion. So you get the opportunity to really connect with other people from around the world, people who are self-similar in terms of scope, scale, climate. And then we'll have a chance to do anywhere between 30 and 40 site-specific Q&A. So something specific to you, something specific to the course. We're going to have those 7 sessions from October 15th to the 25th. 26th. Well, they'll be on Tuesdays. Calls will start at 5 p.m. PST all the way to 8 p.m. EST. Regular price for this course is $399, $400. Right now it's $299, but we do have an opportunity for everybody on the call to actually get it for $50 less if you register by Sunday. There's Scott, there's me, and there's some great testimonials from folks who've worked with Scott. A couple of FAQs. How long will you have access to the course? For a year. Is the course refundable? Nope, this is a non-refundable course. And then can my partner or friend, look over my shoulder? Yes. If you have somebody in the house, if you have somebody working on the project with you, and they're going to sit beside you, absolutely. If they need a login, that's a different story. That's a different piece there. So on the back end, what you'll see is we've listed out the 7 modules, plus we have the student design presentations, because again, one of the great opportunities in this course is you get to develop a design. You get to present that design via recorded video to Scott, and Scott will give you recorded feedback, and then we'll go over it as a class on that final session. But within each of these sessions, what you'll have is you'll have objectives that Scott has laid out about what you're going to learn, how it's going to work. We've got our live sessions with folks can join via the course player or via Zoom. And then we have what I love, I love resources. I love having all those to go back to. What we'll have is we've got this incredible resource section where Scott has specifically gone through, found the different resources that you need to go and read that are either downloadable here on this page. So all these resources he's put up here, or things that he's linked to that he thinks that are important. Either he's written or he's referenced. So there'll be the required resources, the supplementary resources, and then the module assignments. Because again, if you don't want to present to everybody, but you still want to do the assignments, it's there. If you want to present and you want that feedback, fantastic. This is why this course is such an incredible value, because, Scott, if you're purchasing him by the hour, you'd be well over the time that you'd be getting on the course. You'd be well into the $500, $600, $700 just for his consultation time. But you also get all of the resources, all of the Zoom hours, you get all of the Q&A, plus you get feedback from him for your design. So it has an incredible amount of value. And this is the way we design these courses. So that way you've got all the base information, all the theory, you can build upon that understanding, and you can really develop your sense of this course. So that's a quick overview of the course. I'm just going to pop back to presentation here. So one of the things that we want people to know or do or feel at the end is that you have a comfortability with the information. Most people make the mistake of saying, well, I want to be confident in something. Well, confidence is a byproduct of competence, and you can't be competent until you put it in the ground. So we can't offer confidence in being able to design and install these systems because it is an online course, but comfortable with the how, the why, and the when we can do. A lot of online courses will promise you confidence in something that you actually have to go out and do. That's a false promise. You have to go and do it, but you'll have that guidance to walk you through the process and to actually develop your own site. So as we get into this last piece here, I just wanted to let everyone know that you've got the opportunity between now and Sunday at midnight for the ability to get into the course that's currently at $299. Come October 1st, it's actually going to go to $399 to get it at $249. So if you use the code SAP 2024 web, you have the opportunity to get to the course, access the course, and do it. What I want everyone to know is that we don't have plans to run this course live next year, but the course will be available for self-paced after we finish. So probably, December, January, we'll be putting out an email letting everybody know there is an opportunity for folks to be able to jump back into the course and to do it at self-paced. Self-paced means pre-recorded. It means no Scott, but you can go through all the material. So if that's more your speed, there's an opportunity there. Just going to check and see if there's any specific questions about the conversation there. Yes, it is in USD. Thanks for the question there. Resonates with me. Yeah, great. Awesome. So what I'd like to do now is I'm just going to put in the URL into the chat there. And I'm also going to put in that code for anybody who wants to jump in. And then we're going to jump into questions here. Great. Okay, Scott, I'm going to start firing them off at you. So from Atidia, do coffee and ginger go together?
Yes. I'll explain it like this. They occupy different places in our consortium. So coffee is a low climax species. That means it's going to be in the system for a long time, and it doesn't need that much sunlight. Ginger is a low or medium, and we would call it a placenta 2. So it's in our system for up to 2 years, perhaps. And what is going to happen in these syntropic systems is that ginger will be taken out of the system before that coffee's ever starting to produce. Maybe the coffee starts maybe year 3, but that's right after the ginger gets produced. So they're planted at the same time, but because of our emphasis on ecological succession, the ginger is kind of preparing the space for that coffee plant and will eventually be shaded out by that coffee plant or completely removed in the harvest. So there's no competition between those two plants in this system. So yeah, adelante. Go for it.
Thank you, sir. From Juan, can we say that syntropic agroforestry is the tropical version of permaculture forestry, or can it be applied in different climates?
We're seeing it applied in different climates. I think a lot of people have doubts about that. I think there's a lot of information that needs to be figured out still. It's one of the things I love about syntropic farming. Like, we're still on the cutting edge of it. And there's a really good Facebook group. I think it's Syntropic Farming, maybe. I can't remember what it's called, but there's a lot of people in it. There's a temperate climate syntropic farming group I would recommend looking into. The work of Roger Geitzen. He's doing work up in Michigan. So there's people playing with this. Whether it catches on in the same way in the tropics or not, I'm not sure. But I absolutely see it spreading through the Mediterranean very strongly. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. How do you use the scale of permanence in your designs? I think Camille is talking about the keyline scale of permanence for all things agricultural, created by P.A. Yeomans in 1954.
Beautiful. That's our site analysis. That's like our guide when we're trying to understand the context of place. And then as we move down the scale of permanence, we're really focused on access and water. So at the beginning, when we looked at the zoom out of the whole site, it was really like, how does water move through here? How do we move through the site? I would say access is probably the piece that we give the most emphasis to in syntropic farming, specifically around how we move through the rows themselves. It's very common that we use specific mulch materials like logs cut in half on the paths to improve access into the space. As Javi mentioned, we often plant up and down the slope because we find that it's easier on the body to do the pruning work going up and down the slope versus across contour. But it's the scale permanence for me is it's like the whole site planning tool. And then syntropic farming is a way of growing food within the site. So scale permanence is it's a bigger umbrella that syntropic farming lives within.
Great. Yeah, great way of saying it. And it really is a framework, the keyline scale of permanence. It's a framework on which you can hang all of your different site analysis and also your application. Inti, in your experience, do you know projects that are successfully being economically sustainable with lots of diverse crops, or is more common a diversity of service species and high density on one single crop?
Yeah. Hi, Inti. Good to hear from you, man. Um, in Costa Rica, we're in this tiny little wonderful weird country that's very connected with tourism. And so my personal experience has not yet been growing commercial crops. It's always been something mixed with some aspect of tourism. So like a very diverse system to go into a hotel, restaurant, for example. I think though, for most people, it's going to be much more profitable to focus on just a few commercial long-term crops. I think a really high diverse system will work for a homestead or maybe in specific locations where you just are like in that perfect range, close to a market, population densities, things like that. But I really think to scale things for commercial, it's going to have to be focused. Maybe 2 climax crops. That's it, like coffee and avocado, for example, macadamia and tea, for example.
Great answer. Thank you. Maxwell was a student of mine from Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro class. Nice to have you here, man. Currently trying to create a consortium for the southeastern US, perhaps the first in my region, but unfortunately there are no information or known consortiums. Do you see syntropic farming becoming more popular in US and Canada in the future?
Yeah, I feel like we kind of answered this one. I do, it's growing. I think this call, and the diversity of people on it is an example of it. Um, there's people playing in all the climates. And so I would really encourage people to be, what's the word in English? Like outgoing, like looking for those people. There's a number of communities that exist. I'm part of one called the Food Forest Fellowship. A guy, Byron Groves, pretty well known on the social media world. And we just see people all over the place. Yeah, I see Mike Garcia's in that group. He's down in Florida. And so it's definitely growing. Keep at it, share what you're doing, share the lists you get. That's been a struggle of mine trying to build out good lists for this course, is that some people are more open to sharing, some people less so. And so we're always navigating that. Tell us what you learned.
And this is a great example of one of the values of the course. Because Scott is so plugged in, he's actually pulling from a number of different practitioners and educators. So there's incredible amount of information, like that data repository is there. I'm going to switch it up here. Javier, a quick question. Is it possible to go and stay and do practical work at Tierramor?
Yeah, for sure. We have a volunteer program. So if you're interested in coming and working with us, feel free to reach out via social media. I think that's the best way to reach out. Yeah.
Awesome. And if you wouldn't mind putting that link into the chat or the email, that'd be great. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Camille again, how do you balance seed nests and spontaneous germination with efficiency and training staff to maintain the system?
I'd also like to pass this one to Javi, as he manages a crew on the ground and is in this like every single day.
Yeah, I think that as we saw on the webinar, these are very complex systems, and in order to manage them, you need lots of skill, lots of observation. So it takes a long time to train the staff. But the main thing would be to always have someone with experience in the field doing the management with the guys, with the staff. There's always going to be lots of questions and lots of details that need to be figured out. So I always try to be there when we're doing pruning or management work.
Thank you, Javier. From Amanda, no matter how many seeds and plants I design into the system or how much mulch I add, I seem to always have space for what many people call weeds. When do you replant the system or add more plants to fill in those spaces? Do you plant by seed, root, cutting, or trees, or all of them at that moment?
Hi, Amanda. Amanda's an amazing practitioner in Mexico. We first met like 15 years ago in Nicaragua. Yeah, so it's a great question. In management of syntropic farming, which we haven't talked about, there's an idea of synchronization. It's this word we really like. And it's an idea that that moment of replanting is also going to be a moment of pruning, of harvest, et cetera. So we really are trying to synchronize these activities. And so if you're seeing all these gaps in your system, what we're trying to do is line the replanting up with the next big, really aggressive pruning of this space. I'll give a specific example from Mexico, actually, a project in the Chinampas that's focused on horticulture. What they have is 4 meters between tree rows. They grow veggies, like 3 beds or 4 beds, and then they have tree rows. They replant your almacigos, your little veggie seedlings, your lettuces and kales and stuff every 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, depending on the rotation. Every single time they go to replant those, they go to their tree rows, which is full of like sycamore, willow, poplar, and they do a really aggressive pruning of those plants, like a really aggressive coppicing of those plants, to reference another course that Javin offers. And so it's really trying to get that timing down right together. And then do we plant seeds, root cutting, or trees, or all of them at that moment? I think you should just do whatever you can do. Like I would get plants in the ground. One idea I've heard, I don't know, I haven't experienced this, is that you could put seeds in at any time and they're going to germinate when they know it's the right time. There's like an idea that there's an intelligence in those seeds. So you put them in the system, they will come up when it's the right time. But other things like cuttings, seedlings, you need to synchronize all of that work together.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. We've got our first winner for the draw for the course. Tonia Andriana, you have won a spot in the course. So great to have you on the call today. Thank you so much. And to claim that, just email me at javin@allpointsdesign.ca and we'll hook you up with the spot in the course. Looking forward to seeing you in October. Okay, from Jorge. Jorge is asking, organizing strata emergent with medium and tall and low is mainly for maintenance and pruning, or mainly to avoid competition for sunlight?
Yeah, good question. We don't like the word competition. It's mostly, though, I think you're on the right track. It's to stack these plants on top of each other. It's to increase the density. It's to capture sunlight at all of the different strata to maximize photosynthesis in the system. And if we had emergent right on top of high, right on top of medium, right on top of low, there's not enough sunlight that would ever get to the low. So we have to pull those apart between the rows. It also facilitates pruning because it opens up more space to move through the system, to put a ladder in as needed, to use the pole saw, et cetera. But it's really a way to have all of the strata filled within our entire system, which we call a macroorganism in syntropic farming. And so it reduces competition by spreading the plants out, but they're still there working in the same space.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Scott. From Juan's also a former student from Oregon State University's permaculture design course and a mentee for business design with me. When planting off contour, the runoff does not accelerate erosion between rows, question mark.
Javi, what have you found with that at the off contour planting at Tierramor? What do you think?
Yeah, the most important thing if you're gonna plant off contour is to have enough organic matter to cover the soil. Like that's the key. Otherwise, you can have erosion.
Simple.
Awesome. Awesome. And I think this is a great example of how within either a large framework like permaculture or keyline design, there can be a place for systems like syntropic farming, syntropic agroforestry, and specifics on row orientation. So for everybody who's watching and listening, it's not just a prescriptive conversation. It's more about what are we seeing, what are we looking at, and what's the context as we come down to a specific. In T, so you would prefer to put north to south most of the time, if context allows, to maximize photosynthesis?
Yes. I'm going to take into account access, water, etc. But yeah, that's our North Star from like a perspective of ecology. Yeah.
Awesome. From Atia, doesn't a north-south orientation for a tree line create walls of shade instead of allowing more sunlight? Am I missing something?
Yeah. It's a little confusing. Somebody should make like a really good visual of it. Maybe it exists. But basically, what it does is it means that the sunlight hits all of the row evenly. So if we orient the rows east to west, that means certain parts of the row are going to get more sunlight than other parts of the row. And so north to south gives us an even amount of sunlight touching all aspects of the row. And as a total, that means more photosynthetic potential in the entire system.
And I think it also comes down to weakest link, which is something that we talk a lot about in holistic management. What's the weakest link? So if the weakest link is erosion potential, as opposed to photosynthetic potential, then there may be a different choice, right? You may err towards the erosion to fix that as opposed to the photosynthetic. Does that play out in your design process?
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. I like the weakest link concept. And there's times where I would never plant things off of contour, or like, of course not. Like, and so it's really that analysis of your site.
And I think this is probably one of the most important things that is slowly trickling into the regenerative land design process and movement is there should have been no deification from the beginning. Swales shouldn't have been deified. Contour planting shouldn't have been deified. We should have a really big toolbox, open mind, not so open it falls out, but open enough so that way we can pull the tools we need and use them specifically. So we don't become so enamored that we are a permaculturist, we are a syntropic agriculturist. We are individuals who are managing a site and pulling out these tools when necessary. Great. Joshua, when considering off contour versus on contour, is it possible that the off contour section will be advantaged by the rows above being on contour and slowing the water down before it hits the off contour section? Otherwise, I wonder if off contour could be less successful.
We did that on purpose. That was a deliberate design decision because of our nervousness about off contour and the amount of rainfall that falls on that site. Javi, what do you think? If we had done the whole space off contour and repeated that pattern up and down the slope, do you think maybe because the rows are, they become much longer, we might have had to have breaks in them or on contour structures within them? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I'm not sure if I would do the whole hill off contour. I think, as I said before, it comes down to how much organic matter you have on site and are you covering the soil 100%? That's the key. And there's ways to work with it. As Scott said, you could do like a grid. So you have on contour paths every few meters to divide a hill into different sections. You can also plant the Mombasa grass perpendicular to the rows, so kind of on contour, but you have the tree rows off contour. So there's ways to work with it, but yeah, the key is to have enough organic material. Always have the soil covering.
Awesome.
It's very common. We'll use like small logs to line the beds, but we could even turn those logs perpendicular to the flow of water so that the rows are off contour, but the mulch is organized on contour. And so we start playing, real details, but that's the point. Let's get to details eventually.
Brilliant. And this really comes in when you're doing terraces as well, right? Because the patterning between terraces, either with the roadway or with the stairs, does just that, right? It interrupts that flow of water. I think what you guys are coming at from your examples, and again, this is important for everybody to pick up. This is Scott and Javier's experience. They're sharing their experience of something versus having the palace of the mind and playing with it. They have real life experience that's showcasing this. But when you start to apply things, if that whole slope was totally open and there wasn't the big road in between that is really a big gutter, all that water was coming down. At some point, you would have to interrupt it before you then prioritized the maintenance and the people who are walking across versus up and down the roads. Is that generally where we're at?
Thumbs up.
Yeah, thumbs up. Great. Awesome. We have our second winner. We have Mugawa Mugushi or Fred. Fred, thank you so much for being in the webinar, and you've got a spot in the course. We're really looking forward to seeing you on October 15th. Tim just said that he had to leave, but he's looking forward to seeing everybody on the 15th. So hopefully we'll see more folks there. Aditya, how will this work? Tree line in north-south and target crop coffee on contour. I don't know if there's enough context to answer that. Scott, did you want to weigh in?
I mean, I can imagine a scenario where you put your coffee on contour and then you run all your support trees up and down the slope and you do the majority of your pruning up and down the slope. It's kind of like that grid pattern that Javi talked about. It would be a cool exercise to create a nice visual of what that could look like, because I think it's going to be something that keeps coming up in future conversations. So yes, I think there's things to play with there.
Awesome. And just to give everyone a sense, we've got a couple more minutes left, so we'll get a few more questions in. We'll get one more winner, and then we'll close. Sorry if we didn't get to your question. Free webinars, that's the name of the game. But if you do have a lot of questions, if you're thinking, yeah, I do want to be guided through this, I do want to really dive in and understand this, course is a great place to do that. From Gabriella, in Species Selection Excel, are you trying to figure out how many numbers of plants per hectare, or what area do you refer to?
The planting area. Yeah. So in that spreadsheet, it was the first year. Javi, how big was the planting area in year one? Do you remember?
Around 1,200 square meters.
Yeah. So it's for that first 1,200 square meter section.
Awesome.
Often what I'll do is break it down by maybe 100 square meter blocks and calculate, or if I know the row length, each row of 20 meters needs this many of this species, this many of this species, this many of this species, etc.
Great. From Jorge again, are there examples of syntropic plots with a body of water in its boundaries? Imagining it would be advantageous in terms of maybe microclimates, more biodiversity, niches covered, and also as inputs of organic matter, azolla, water lilies, etc.
Yeah, 100%. The first plot Javi and I co-designed and he really installed has 4 sedimentation ponds that are full of water. I don't know what, half the year, Javi, maybe a little bit more. And we fill them with water hyacinth. They dry up. But I've seen photos of really a buddy's place in southern Brazil that has a huge pond in the middle. I can only imagine benefits from that. Yeah.
Awesome. From Rees, will the 3-to-1 principle change in Mediterranean climate? I think they're talking about how the row layout was.
I don't know. Fingers crossed. I'm going to spend part of the year in Italy. My partner is Italian. And so come back next year. But it's a good question. I don't have an answer to that. It could be. I don't know if Italy, the Mediterranean, if it's so much that we have to cover the soil, it might be more of a focus on reducing evaporation with shade and getting more trees up. So those are going to be like the pieces we explore.
Awesome. Awesome. So we got a great question about the course from Paul. The website calls the course a primer. Is there a path for more advanced courseware? And how far does the education rabbit hole go before entry? Obviously, we should all just get started, but at what level do you see people needing to become a practitioner to others? So I think there's a few pieces here, and I'll answer a little bit and then I'll pass it off to Scott. So one thing is that the RegenerativeLiving.online has really been about getting initial information and enough information to go and try. One of my all-time mentors who created one of the first food forests in Canada, Richard Walker, in the late 70s said, after every course, take a stick, go out, dig a hole, plant a live stick, and start. So a big part of this is getting the information, going and starting, finding people to work with. We'll talk about that in the course, how to find potential plots and lands and conversations to work with it. At that point, if I was to start again, which I am in Syntropic Agroforestry and Syntropic Farming, I will be finding a plot to work with. So clients locally will be putting it in, and then I will be working with Scott to help that process along. One thing Scott and I talked about, which is not planned yet, but could be there, is potentially an advanced course that is still online, but helps people specifically go through their process, building on the theory of course one. And then there are the courses that Scott runs locally in Costa Rica, which I would say would then be a great next step. Go to a course if you don't have land, or if there's an issue with feeling like you have the ability to go and move trees around. Go to an in-person course, go install something like Tierramor, and really learn that process. That's what I would advise. But Scott, what are your thoughts?
Go to Brazil. Honestly, like that's where, my buddy calls it like becoming go with the black belts, go where the black belts are. You can see 20-year-old systems, 25-year-old systems there. There's increasingly people doing English language stuff in Brazil. There's two online communities. One I mentioned, the Food Forest Fellowship, and there's another one that Scott Hall has that I find both to Scott Hall's in particular is, I would say, for maybe more advanced content. He's like a farmer, like fifth generation grain farmer. I've really drawn a lot of inspiration from his work. I think you just have to start. Nothing beats it. That's where you're going to figure out what questions you have. Otherwise, it's hard to know what even to ask after a certain point.
Awesome. Awesome. And I know that Helen's on with us now. And Helen, I know you have an in-person course that's coming up. Do feel free to put the information of that into the chat, because people might want to do an in-person course versus an online, or it might be more local, or, this is the thing about the people in this space. There's very little competition at an initial level, because we all want to see everybody applying this. And there's just so much to be done that if that's a better fit for you, I would definitely recommend it. And Helen does amazing work and would be an amazing teacher. Yeah, Helen, please do put that in the chat. We've got our final winner here. We've got Gabor Molnar. So you've won a spot in the course. Really looking forward to seeing you on October 15th. Please do reach out and send me an email and I'll set you up. Well, folks, we've definitely gone over time, but that's because Scott put so much into that presentation, and I'm so appreciative of it. So first and foremost, thank you so much, Javier, for being here, for being able to give us an on-the-ground experience, for working at this. I love hearing when soil scientists and agricultural scientists jump into the work. So really appreciate that. And are there any final words from you before I move on to Scott? Anything you want to share with folks, or reiterate about your site?
No, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm really excited to share what we've been doing for the past few years. And I invite you to come to Tierramor. I left the link in the chat if you want to apply for volunteer work. And yeah, hope to see you around. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. And thank you to Scott. Scott, thank you for whatever that originating impulse was in you that started you down this path that then led to the person you are today, to be able to share with us the exceptional experience and just the desire to experiment and learn. It's such an important piece. It's something that I think is generally beaten out of us in modern school, and we have to relearn as adults for the majority. But thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for the presentation. And thank you so much for being ready to jump into the course on October 15th. I'm really excited for it. Again, as a student and a host, I'm even more excited than I was before.
Yeah, it's just a pleasure. We're all students. I'm a student at this, and yeah, it's just feel grateful to connect with people, especially as my life moves a little toward Europe. It's really nice to see people here that I've followed on Instagram, like Helen and her colleague Felipe. I'm like, oh yeah, good. Let's connect more. And yeah, I really enjoy the process of teaching and trying to organize all of this kind of complex information into something coherent. And I really hope if you can join for the course, that's what you'll get out of it, and it'll give you the confidence to go and try this.
Awesome. Awesome. And Helen has put in the website for that upcoming course. She's also put in her Instagram as well as Felipe's Instagram in there as well. So if you want to start following people, one of the things that we talk about in the courses all the time is making sure that the feeds that are coming into your world are of people who are inspiring you. No more doom scrolling, just people who every time you go onto social media, you're like, oh, I want to do more and connect more. So there's that as well. So again, everybody, if you're interested in the course, if you want to jump in, October 15th, we start, goes to November 26th. Regular cost is $399 come October 1st. Current early bird cost is $299, but from today until Sunday, you have a great opportunity to jump into the course at $50 off, and the links are there. I will put them back into the chat here in a moment. If any of the courses in regenerative living seem of interest to you, definitely check it out. Or if any of the upcoming courses, like Joe's course about living soils, if you're unaware about the living soil food web underneath your feet, if you want to learn how to make good compost, if it totally baffles you and compost always comes out kind of chunky and not exactly decomposed, Joe is the lady to teach you. If you're interested in biochar, we have a great biochar course coming up in 2025 with Kelpie Wilson. Also, I'll be running for the first time ever for the last 10 years. I've mentored individuals specifically to develop their business or skill up their business for 65 different businesses. Alan was actually one of my clients, and I'm finally offering a group course, so there'll be an opportunity there. You just want to be aware of these things. Sign up for the newsletter on RegenerativeLiving.online or allpointsdesign.ca. And thank you so much for your interest. Thanks for being interested in this. Thank you for the work you do in the world. We need more of us. And it's nice to kind of gather the church and have a little sermon and a bit of a hymn every once in a while, because then we all go back out to the work. I will be sending out an email after this. We'll be uploading this as a replay. So if you want to come back, pause the screen, take notes, great time to do it. We'll also have the information out there. And oh, Helen, thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for the recommendation. It was such a pleasure to work with her. Anyways, folks, have a lovely day. Thanks for all the work you do, and hopefully we'll see you in another regenerative living event or course. Take care, everybody.
Ciao.